Exciting news, folks. Our speaker for tonight is in the house, so we are now able to rest assured and get started. Start off by showing everyone the agenda for the evening. As you know, 6 p.m. is our normal time to get close to starting, but we did pizza and refreshments first. I have a few quick announcements, our main presentation, and stick around, please, for door prizes and a few demos at the end. We usually try and wrap up around 8, but with the schedule tonight, we may run a little longer, and then we have to be out of here after conversations and networking by about 9 o'clock. And thank you, everyone online, for your patience, for hanging around. Greatly appreciate that. So typically I try each month to talk about the things that have happened since we were here last. And with the Christmas break and holidays that we've just gone through, there haven't been quite as many major announcements that directly impact Windows Holographic, with the main exception, of course, was CES, which was a flood of information. There was tons of information in the VR, AR, and mixed reality space. Probably the most significant thing that I'd like to call to everyone's attention, which I keep driving home each meeting for the last few months, is that Windows Holographic is continuing to expand. We had 5 different OEMs display VR accessory devices, and we also had Intel have a major keynote that was kind of historic in a way. They had most of their press folks with VR headsets on, and gave them a number of different experiences during his talk, and pushed really hard on the value or the investment that they're making as far as the Project Alloy platform and the new untethered devices that they're going to be pushing out into the Windows holographic space in the near future. So if you haven't heard me pounding on that several times already, something to really take note of. HoloLens is the first device on the platform that we're focused on, but many of the apps that you're creating for that device will also port very nicely over to these other VR and mixed experiences. The other thing I want to clarify is that tonight we had one speaker lined up who was going to talk about the first Windows holographic HoloLens dev book that was in the market. Unfortunately, he was snowed in last night in the snowstorm in Oregon, and notified me around 11 o'clock that he had a foot of snow around him. And anybody local here knows that a foot of snow here is not the same as a foot of snow in Canada or up north. It closes everything down. So he was frightened at that point that things were going to be bad. We checked this morning, and of course it was even worse. So we're very fortunate that Toni has been available and offered to step up and talk to us tonight. Next month in February, we have Robert Scoble and Shal Israel, 2 more kind of celebrity speakers who happen to be in town and who have agreed to come and speak to our group. So we're starting the new year off with celebrities all over the place, so this is really great. As far as the talk that was scheduled for this evening, we hope to have that on March 15th. It's currently showing, I think, as March 8th, but the space was not available. So we will continue and have Alan come in and speak to us on the March meeting. So we're going to take a minute or two just to get Toni hooked up. He's just literally walked in the door and hasn't had a chance to hook his laptop up. But we should be ready to kick things off. While Toni comes up, I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with who Toni is, but for those who are not, Toni became kind of a celebrity in our space back in November at the Unity Connect conference when Unity really drove home the VR and AR commitments that they're making. And Toni's been brought on to Unity as the VR AR strategist. And he's leading that strategy. And normally I don't think we would get him at a local user group meeting. He was actually curious to come out and attend and hear what was going on here. But fate had it that he's also going to speak with us tonight and give us one of his recent presentations, along with open question and answer and a bit of slant as far as he can on the Windows holographic efforts that they're making as well. So give us a moment or two and we'll be ready to go. So that should
Setup. The HDMI should work. I have this
should.
fancy new MacBook with all the USB-C connectors.
I'll just transition over.
But that should work HDMI-wise. And then, can you get HDMI audio out? I do have one video I want to play toward the end that has audio.
Do you have audio output?
I do have audio output, and I can just set up to make sure that's working.
Is it standard headphone jack?
Yeah, that's the one thing they did. Unlike the iPhone 7, is they actually have an audio jack. Am I using that mic?
Sorry, what's that?
Am I use this mic? Or
Yeah, that's the main.
you have a clicker, presentation clicker thingy? That one there? Might have to just set up. Oh, you know what? I don't have the USB port, so screw it. I'll just tap on this. They just do the audio setup. Make sure that's set up for output. Headphones, yes, should be good.
That's something that'll play.
We can test it real quick, just so that we don't break the flow later. Maybe I have to do this. Is that playing? Click it to play.
It's been hard at work since February, haven't we?
A couple of months.
Yeah,
Great, okay.
at Visions.
So that's working.
Excellent. That water's good. Absolutely.
So pay no attention to everything that just happened. I'll be right back.
Thanks for doing this. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I know it's got to be a big deal. It's got to be a lot of fun.
I'm a little amazed at this.
He was out of San Francisco office. He's not even again. I think he just came on a month or two ago. So I don't know much about him. Yeah, I'm going to find out. This will be my introduction. Maybe I'll say hi to him. It is. It's especially rewarding for us. I hope it is for you too.
Well, no, that's the rewarding part. Have people actually do that.
Yeah, there's two groups. The one I'm in, which is part of the platforms team. So we do everything from like supporting Xbox and PlayStation.
So you can walk around with that. There's lots of links, or you can leave it on the
That's
screen.
okay.
We have like some people who actually switch out houses.
Check one, two.
Oh, there's a on-off switch on the top.
Hello.
On-off.
Hey, everybody. Oh. There we go. I might have to handhold it if it's going to keep doing that. Hey, everybody. Thanks for your patience. This was all very last minute. I'm glad we could make it happen. Thank you so much, Dwayne. So the story is this. I just started a job at Unity. I'll give you my background in a few minutes. But my friend Sarah Stumbo, who's here in the room today, say hi. Sarah over there messaged me because she knew I was coming up to Seattle today, and she said, "Are you going to that Windows holographic meetup?" And I said I didn't know about it. So I went online and looked, and the RSVPs were closed. So I contacted Dwayne, and I said, "Hey man, is there any way, I just started at Unity, is there any way I could just kind of sneak in? And you're probably full and all that." And he said, "Well, it just so happens that our featured speaker tonight was snowed in. Do you think you could possibly come and do a talk?" So I spent 15 minutes and put together this 30-slide talk, which you're about to see. No, actually, I had this in my back pocket already, so it's great. I'll try not to drone on with a bunch of slides. This is a slightly corporate kind of talk for a meetup. But before I get into that, let's do my background a little bit in case you don't know about me. Back in the mid-90s, I was working on a technology called VRML. It was an early attempt to deliver 3D graphics content in a web browser. I don't know how many of you are close enough to the age where you appreciate how stupid that idea was just from a practical standpoint. It's a brilliant idea from a vision standpoint, and we're kind of realizing a lot of these ideas together right now with VR and AR, and I'm working actively in that area right now. But back then, that was a time when the internet was just getting started. We're talking like 1994. All right, so some of you, I don't even know if some of you were born, so we won't go there. But in 1994, computer processing power was measured in megahertz, not gigahertz. The internet was dial-up modem based. Does everyone here know what a modem is? And seriously, I'm not trying to be a dick and I'm not trying to be patronizing. I just want to know. Okay, it's that thing that goes beep and squawk. It's really cute now, but we did not have broadband networking. We did not have fast computers. If you wanted a computer that did 3D graphics back then, you had a tower PC. I mean, laptops were 8, 10 pounds, you know, like any laptop, not these weird gaming Razer laptops. And you had to take a graphics card and stick it into the computer and add to it to get your 3D graphics, like a $1,000 card you would add to a then, $3,000 desktop PC. So all by way of saying we're a little ahead of ourselves on the reality of the technology of being able to deploy something in 3D to lots of people. The other thing that was going on was that people were just starting to develop web content. The first web browsers that we worked with didn't even have JavaScript yet. But they did have this thing called a plugin architecture, and I built a plugin that would render VRML as 3D graphics in Internet Explorer. I used to come up here all the time to Redmond and visit with Microsoft. They bundled this plugin I built called Worldview into Internet Explorer 2, 3, and 4. We actually had about 100 million of those distributed on CDs. You didn't download software back then, you had it on a CD. And maybe 10% of those were activated. So people were trying to like, oh, what's this new web thing? And 10 million people play with a plugin that would render a couple of cubes at like 10 frames a second. So that's where we're at. But the vision was there, but it was definitely way too early. And we learned a lot about the technology to do that. And I, for some stubborn or stupid or maybe, long-term, I'll be vindicated, visionary reason, I kept at 3D graphics. And every once in a while would dip a toe in and look at how that connected to the web. And was working diligently on that with a technology called WebGL, and started building some application layers on top of WebGL. I was consulting, I was building websites for people that would render in 3D. Now we're talking 3 or 4 years ago. Wrote a few books for O'Reilly and Associates on it, teaching people how to develop in WebGL. When in 2012, somebody put an Oculus Rift on my head, and I said, oh my God, what a piece of shit this thing is. I don't want to see that for like 5 years, right? It's not ready, because I mean, DK1 we're talking about, right? And people kind of kept at me, come on, this VR stuff in WebGL, it's going to be great. I'm like, no, you don't understand. WebGL is going to be on every phone, every computer. It's going to be super mainstream soon. Don't get this geeky VR stuff anywhere near me. I don't even want to talk about it. But like many people, once the Facebook Oculus thing happened and VR started getting mainstreamy again, I tinkered in phone-based AR and some other technologies like this over the years as well. Everyone started paying attention to it. It became inevitable and obvious to me. And it sounds cynical, but it wasn't really a cynical thing. It was more just like, okay, if Facebook's going to invest in it, then there's going to be enough resources put behind the technology to make this thing work, because there was so much still to do. And if it was just one company doing it, one startup, as much cachet as Oculus had and as promising as it sounded, I felt like I had seen the movie before and seen technologies like that flop because they didn't have enough resources put behind them. So that Facebook watershed moment got me to rethink it. And within a few months of that, folks started crawling out of the woodwork asking me to advise their VR startups. I met Ari over there, and we were working together on stuff and down in San Francisco. And a lot of great things started happening around VR, and the world exploded. And then, before you knew it, AR started becoming part of that same conversation. And Microsoft started doing the concept videos around the HoloLens. And now I go forward in time 2 years, and here we are. So that's my personal bio. And I was actually working on some web VR things, which we can talk about later, and about to start a startup when the folks at Unity found me last fall and asked me if I wanted to join Unity. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing as a company in a little bit. And you guys are probably all familiar with this. How many people here are actively developing in VR or AR right now? That's great. And I'm going to assume a good percentage of you are Unity users. If you're doing HoloLens stuff, that's kind of the way to do it, right? So everyone here knows Unity. And some folks who are new to the space, right? Okay, so fine. I've got some vision pieces in the slide that I've recycled from some other talk, like I said, so we'll go through those quickly, and then I want to tell you about Unity a little bit, and then we can make it interactive, right? We're here for, it's a meetup, so I don't want to get too formal about this, so let's get into it. So I think we all feel that we're at a transformative moment here, that we're not just here to build some cool little apps, and that we're not just here to make games, but that we're actually creating a new computing medium. And this is a fundamentally different and transformative medium. A lot of us in the room have been at this for a while. We're older. I'm looking at you, man. Mike, where are you? Some old friends from Microsoft in the back room, in the back of the room. But the younger generation, the younger folks here in the room, you're actually part of a generational, transformational change. We're doing something brand new. Nothing this big has happened since maybe I'd say PCs and the internet. I would say mobile is actually a stepping stone along the way to this, because we can make whole new worlds here. VR and AR together are basically making mass changes. Something as humble and simple as Pokemon Go has demonstrated how phone-based augmented reality versus the deeper mixed reality of, say, a HoloLens, is now getting into the public consciousness. I mean, I don't know if you're purists in the audience. I haven't been to an AR meetup before anywhere ever, so this is my first. Thank you for the opportunity. But for a lot of people, that's not AR, or it's not mixed reality, because it's just little graphics overlaid with a camera on a freaking phone. But for the mass consciousness and for the world, this is augmented reality. And what they're understanding is that we can actually enhance the real world with these gadgets, and they're starting to think about things a little bit differently. So the mainstreamness of Pokemon Go fits along a spectrum of the depth of virtual reality and the long-term promise of AR in a way that's going to really transform what we're doing here. Because we're talking about making worlds that you can go to, creating a sense of presence, basically creating applications that can change everything about the way we think about what a computer is, the way we think about what media is, taking us to whole worlds, and basically invading every part of our lives in the sense that this is going to transform communication, arts, sports, entertainment, broadcast, take us to brand new places, and give us ways to share moments that we've never been able to share before. And that's true of VR, where you're shutting off the outside world, as well as AR, where you're enhancing the real world, digital stuff, MR, I don't know. What do you guys call it here? Do you call it MR or AR?
I think MR is catching on more as the space.
The HoloLens folks are starting to use that term a little bit more. We're actually having a healthy discussion at Unity about what do we call it. Everything I have in every one of my slides, my business cards, every one of my talks is VR/AR. It's kind of annoying, actually. So I've heard XR as well, right?
XR.
You vote XR?
Yeah.
Do you get a vote? Okay.
I think I should get
Who votes for XR? Show of hands. Who votes for VR/AR? Nobody likes that. A couple people. Who votes for? Is there something else? MR. Oh, okay. So XR versus MR. Integrated
reality.
or immersive?
Integrated specifically because it involves trust.
Oh, wow. All right, that would, so let's come back to this debate. So, but I think, do we all agree in this room that we're bringing new kinds of magic into the world when we're doing this? Especially with augmented reality. Hey, look, right here. Whether it's Iron Man, Minority Report, or something more fantastical than that even. And to me and to us at Unity, we're really taking this pretty seriously. We have this great set of technologies, and we get into this in a minute about how successful and great we are in all these different ways. But we're really starting from first principles here, thinking this is a magical technological transformation that is a lot like the technology transformations we've seen before, and a lot of these in recent memory, or things at least that we maybe take for granted and have grown up with, but we can still, they're not so far back that we can appreciate what it may have been like, say, before they happened. Imagine a world before electricity. As soon as the sun went down, your workday was over, right? Once we had electricity, we can keep the lights on and we can work longer days. What do you think that meant for how we do things, right? We could create machines that we could power that could build bigger buildings than we could before. There's so many things we could do before that started with just this one little piece called electricity that now is just a pervasive part of our daily lives. It's the microphone, it's the lights we have, it's everything, it's the computers, right? The combustion engine, same thing. It started out as a place to take you from point A to point B on the road, but it turned into what powers jet planes and everything else. And what did that mean? That means we can transcend distance, which changes our notions of time, changes our notions of scale in a big way, right? The television, the first, or television and radio together, but primarily television, the first mass communication medium where we can export an entire culture, where we can tell stories across distance. These things brought us together and changed our lives in ways we just can't even appreciate from a time before they were invented. Now we're kind of moving up in time to some of us who can remember time before the internet, where personal computers were all connected and we could start sending each other email. That was pretty radical. And now you move that toward beyond email to pages and ways for people to self-publish and give voice and pictures to those same communications. Everybody became a publisher, and we took the ideas of TV and transcended geography and brought them into information. And look at the internet economy that's been created, right? Now you take that and you not only make it now mobile and portable, and now you have something that not only basically allowed us all to publish, but it turned entire industries upside down. And this we're all old enough now where we can, like, in the last 3 years, what has it done? It has changed transportation. I Uber everywhere now, right? It's kind of amazing. It's changed hospitality, the Airbnb, right? And the list goes on. Guess what? These are things we could not have thought about when the phones were being invented, when the internet was being invented. They emerged out of this, right? And so now we're at this place where it's beyond the PC, it's 3 billion devices. But the thing is, again, we did not know what we were doing when we built these things. Henry Ford made the combustion engine, and if he'd asked people, what do you want to do with this thing? They would have said, give me a faster horse. But we know now that that's not the way these things work. So here we are with VR and AR, MR, XR, IR, and we have a new technology, and what's the first thing we do? Okay, this is, you ask the pundits, they're going to say, well, VR is for gaming, right? This is what we do with it. We make games because it looks like a video game. How are we going to distribute the content? We're going to put it in an app store because that's what worked on our phone. So VR is all delivered in an app store. We don't know what this world's going to be like with XR in 3 or 4 years. We simply don't know, right? But that's an exciting thing. That's not a bad thing. And it's sort of like you've probably heard the metaphor now. When TV first started, people tried to put stage plays up on TV, and that was their first attempt at making media for that medium. And it's because we don't know, and we have to experiment for a while, and that's the stage we're at, right? So that's all good. So let's drill into this a little bit more. So not only do we not know what's going to happen, we really don't know how long it's going to take. Everyone's super excited about this, and they have this sort of feeling that, okay, once these products are introduced, we're going to have a steady, linear, that yellow line, a linear way that they're going to get adopted. And over time, just the market's going to grow, it's going to grow, it's going to grow. And this is something Unity thinks about a lot, actually, and I'm in full agreement with. That's not the way the world actually works. When you look at the way technologies are adopted, they kind of happen slower at first, and then they pick up steam. And they're more like the white curve, right? And that's all good, because we probably understand this if we're sophisticated technologists. But the problem is consumers might not understand this stuff isn't quite ready. The press may get really excited about it, and then when they find out that we're here, instead of on the yellow line, articles start getting written that talk about VR is dead. I've been there before. I've been there twice now. VR is dead, right? Fact is, it's not dead. It's picking up more steam, but we have started to see that backlash. We saw some TechCrunch and other articles last month about this. It's like, oh, this is really disappointing. The PSVR they only shipped 700,000 units. Did everyone see the stat though? There's been 5 million Gear VR shipped now. That was just reported on VentureBeat, I think. So that's great news. So we're in this place now that some people call the gap of disappointment or the trough of disillusionment. We're actually in there right now as an industry. Oh my God, the HoloLens costs $3,000 to $5,000, and how we're going to build stuff for that thing? Who's going to buy it? It's not on every street corner yet. It's not Pokemon Go scale yet. It's not Facebook. You don't have 3 billion users using the HoloLens, so therefore it's a flop. Well, that's not correct, and some of that's on us to set expectations in the industry. So here's what we do. Here's what John Riccatello, my CEO, does. Our CMO does this, Clive Downey. I talk about this now. It's like, look, guys, it's all right. We're all going to get through this together. The folks building stuff, building the hardware, building the tools and runtimes like Unity, building the content, as long as we know that and we set everyone's expectations and we don't get ahead of ourselves and try and, get a startup funded for $300 million and do, excessively ambitious things, we're probably fine. Now, unfortunately, every industry, especially in tech, I live in San Francisco. It's the epicenter of that kind of thinking, overvaluation. Seattle's not so bad with this, but it's also a tech industry hub. As long as we don't get ahead of ourselves, we're going to be fine. And the good news is we are going to be fine. We firmly believe at Unity, and I believe this in my heart, we've got enough factors in play now as an industry where we're going to get there. We are so going to get there on this stuff. We have all the major technology companies investing heavily in infrastructure, operating systems, hardware, funding enough application development beyond the venture-funded stuff. Real people selling real stuff that solve real people's problems today. So I think that combination and the joint effort, through that we're going to get there. And you know what? It's okay that there's only a few million units of some of these things out there right now, because how else do you get to 1 billion seats without going through the first million? So we're there right now. We're just at that place. So as long as we're all good with that, that's great. And so the other thing that we think here at Unity, and this may be a little bit at odds with what's going on with the HoloLens community, but this is okay. We're just talking sort of general industry trends here, is we believe a lot of the drive of this to get to scale is going to be through mobile. And I don't think that's a particularly radical or contentious notion. When you look at the form factors of mobile, VR, and AR, we're talking about the price of a phone and maybe a little more for a drop-in headset. Maybe you're spending $300 to $500 on an all-in-one dedicated unit. These are starting to be talked about and come out maybe. That's fundamentally different from $2,000 or so to plop down on a Vive or a Rift system with a good computer, or what it costs today to buy a HoloLens, which I think we all probably believe those prices are going to drop radically in the next 3 to 5 years when it comes to the AR headsets. So while that's all going on and those costs are coming down on the high-end stuff, from the low end, I think that's where we're going to see scale, and scale is really important to get some of these businesses going. So we at Unity believe mobile is going to drive a lot of this from the units adoption level, but of course, the headsets that are more expensive, both AR and VR, are the ones that are going to set users' expectations and whet their appetites. And the early adopters will spend the $3 to $5,000 on that. Now, probably in AR, with that price tag, it's probably going to be a little more enterprise, a little more high-end use than, say, your Pokemon Go kind of thing. But that's all right, too, because we're talking about a whole ecosystem here. So anyway, we think a lot of units will be driven by mobile. But then, regardless of that, wherever you are on the spectrum, how many people do both VR and AR in here? Well, that's an interesting overlap there. We could get into that. We'll offline that, though, so we don't randomize the talk here. But at Unity, we have a simple proposition, which is that we're trying to provide the tools to do either of those. We believe there's so much initial interest right now and initial energy in VR that we're going to invest a lot in that right now, but we're also not ignoring the AR headsets at all, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. So here we are, this empty landscape. How do we populate it? Well, here's the unabashed plug for my company that I just joined. And when you look at these stats, I'm going to share some data with you. A lot of these are behind, there's some of the reasons I joined this company besides being excited about the product, all right? So right now in mobile games, on your flat old phone, 32% of those, 2D and 3D, are actually built with Unity. Q4 2016, 5 billion app installs were triggered that were apps made with Unity. I still can't believe that number. On 2.4 billion handsets. Over the lifetime of Unity, we've had 6 million registered developers. I am not at liberty at the moment to say how many of those are active. It's a significant portion of them. At some point, we can sort of talk about that. Lots. It's not 6 million, but that's lifetime of people who've signed up for Unity. A lot of, they go away. Not everybody uses a product forever, right? But it's a good, significant percentage of those people. When we surveyed VR and AR developers a few months back, about 1,000 of them, around 3/4 of them were Unity users. That doesn't mean they didn't use Unreal or they didn't use a 2D toolkit for doing some stuff, or they didn't, that just means they'd all, those 74% were using Unity at some level. That's pretty amazing. When Daydream launched, yeah, go ahead.
Of those 74% that were using Unity, was that for VR and AR or just in general?
That was for VR and AR. That's what I'm saying. So we surveyed roughly 1,000, and just a little bit under 1,000 developers in VR and AR, and I don't know what the split is between the two. And 74% of them said they were Unity users. Okay? So that's not just, that's not mobile.
I meant like specifically, were they using Unity to develop VR and AR, or were they VR and AR developers who may have happened to use Unity for other projects?
They are VR and AR developers. Oh, no, the ones that we surveyed were using Unity for their VR and AR projects, but they weren't necessarily using them exclusively. So that's why that number is a little wishy-washy, right? They may use other tools for other projects as well, right? And then when Daydream launched, 50% of the launch titles were made with Unity. I'm just going to beat this one to death for a couple more slides. So Oculus's developer conference, Oculus Connect 3, Zuckerberg showed a social application which was avatars connected with live media like photo sharing, videos, a webcam at his house where he could keep an eye on his dog. They call it Oculus Oculus Avatars, I think they called it. And that was made with Unity, as well as 22 of the 25 titles that were on the show floor at Oculus Connect. So all by way of saying a lot of people use Unity to develop their VR and AR. One of the interesting things about that for me as a job, the reason I was hired at the company is, okay, so we do that, that we sort of walked into this situation. We built such a great game development tool that naturally solves VR and AR problems. But what do we do with it as a business? We have a lot of people buying Unity Pro licenses. We have other ways we make money. Where do we go from here? So that's my job here, and I don't have ready and pithy answers for you yet. I've only been on the job for 2 months, though we're working on it internally. But the way we got here is through 3 core principles that my company is still adhering to. We're extending these into VR, but this is how we were winning on the independent game development front and got to where we did today, which is the first and foremost. And this comes from David Helgeson, the original founder, Copenhagen-based, where this company was started years ago. Democratizing development. We want everybody to be able to make games, is where it started. Now we want everybody to be able to make VR and AR. It's about 3D development. We want to create the most accessible runtime and tool set to make your 3D. Solving hard problems. Stuff in VR and AR is super hard. Rendering, high performance, and I'm going to drill into a few of these in a second. And then finally, enable success. So one of the things Unity has as a business, this is wildly interesting, is a mobile ads business for its games. So if you're a game dev making a 2D mobile game right now, like on a flat phone, whether it's 2D render or 3D render, you can do either one in Unity. You can opt into our ads platform and make money. And we actually paid out more money to developers in 2016 than we collected in Unity Pro licensing fees because of our ads business, which is pretty phenomenal. And this ads business is pretty simple. You're playing a game, and then between levels, you can watch a video ad. And if you watch it, you'll level up faster. It's crazy, but it makes a lot of money. Who'd have thought? I mean, the people in this room, I'm sure most of us don't even think that way, right? Like we're building the future of AR and VR, but this is the reality. This is what people do. Is they're playing, they're Bejeweled, and then or game like that, and then they wait for an ad, and then they do more stuff, right? So that's kind of amazing. And so we want to always stick to those principles where folks like you guys, I mean, you want to be in business, you want to make money. I mean, some of you may not be commercial, may be doing research, but if you're commercially focused, you want to make money, and we want to be able to help you. And so going into VR and AR, will that be with mobile ad takeovers like that? Probably not. We're going to figure out some new thing, and we're going to go down that path with developers like you guys. And so now just a couple of quick highlights, because then I actually want to turn it over and get it interactive so you guys don't get too sleepy over there. What just happened?
There you go.
Yeah,
You're back.
back.
Thank you. Yeah, so focus on graphics and performance. We want to be the best graphics engine out there. We have competitors, they do well in graphics. We've been investing a lot in a lot of real-time rendering. This is a guy named Adam. He's sort of become, he's taken on a life of his own where he's become original IP that Unity has. But it started out as a demo of our cool rendering features with screen space occlusion and all kinds of fancy shader stuff that I wish I could say what they are, but I actually have to go cheat and look at my list. Hang on, I have a list right here because I'm only at the job for 2 months. I don't know, it's just depth of field tone mapping and really bland stuff anyway. I don't know, I got this from labs of research people, but these things have made it into the engine. We've made a lot of investments over the last year to make sure the graphics are really great. But not just graphics, performance is really a key item here too. So let me move on to that. We did something with, kind of not specifically for VR, but it actually helps with VR a lot, called the scriptable render loop. So how many people here have ever built a game engine? Okay, so one of the things you might know if you built a game engine is that your rendering, your order of operations and rendering can matter, and different systems have different ways of doing that and optimizing for it. But if you create but you never want to burden the application developer with that too much because it makes it really hard to write your code. So Unity is this wonderful piece of middleware, has this way of doing rendering. It sets up a bunch of data structures, all the meshes, all the lights, all the materials, and then at some point it says render. Well, that structure works great for a certain class of hardware and software, and then along comes Metal and Vulkan on all these new APIs that Apple and all these other people have been putting out for different devices. And it turns out that that fixed render loop we had didn't work so well, so we re-architected it so that you as a game dev could actually write your own, or we could flexibly target different devices using the scriptable render loop technology. So that's in Unity 5.6 that's coming out, which is in beta right now. It's going to ship soon. As well as actually working on Vulkan and some other low-level graphics API technology. So all of this matters for VR and AR a lot because frame rate is essential. You've got to make sure you're refreshing your scene as fast as possible. Tolerances in VR are super high. In AR, they're a little less just because you've got this, you can see the world around you, so you don't get so much of that motion sickness stuff necessarily. Plus, the devices don't all refresh that fast. But for VR, it's super important. So we made a significant investment in that, so you don't have to write your own game engine to do it, or SDK. On the platform side, this is nuts. Unity supports like 28 platforms, not for VR and AR, but 28 total, mobile and desktop and console and everything else, including, as you know, because if you're HoloLens developers, this is how you build stuff. You build it in Unity. But we have partnerships with everyone from Google Daydream to Oculus, Microsoft. There's a pretty long list. And so we've invested to get first-class support in that. So, basically you could, I don't even want to suggest that you port your VR app to AR. So I would say instead, if you built an AR app, you could go from one system to another, and the port could be, in terms of just the basic code, could be a matter of hours instead of days or weeks. Of course, that's assuming there aren't redesign issues you have to do to go to a different device. I'm not talking about redesigning your app, but simply porting the code, and 90% of that's graphics, right? So we make that stuff really easy, and we've invested a lot in that. This is actually a VR-specific thing I'm going to skip it, unless, is anybody doing 360 videos in augmented reality? I don't think so.
Please do.
Yeah, really? Full 360s?
Oh yeah, that's definitely a space of interest when it's holographic.
Really? Okay. So here's the thing. For a couple of years, people were building 360 video players themselves because they couldn't do it in Unity. Unity was playing back textures, but it didn't have high-res enough video textures to do good 360 video, which is basically a texture mapped onto the inside of a sphere. So what people were doing is they were writing their own Unity plugins or writing their own player from scratch in native code. But if you write a Unity plugin, all you were getting was basically Unity was giving you the camera motion and a sphere. You had to do everything else yourself in like native Android code, native desktop code if you wanted to be cross-platform. So we added a 360 video player feature, which includes 4K textures. Some people are already complaining that they need 8K, but 4K is a pretty good start, as well as a sort of set of out-of-the-box properties. So the sphere is rendered from the inside instead of the outside. If you know any of this, if you tried to build it yourself, actually, I wrote a book on VR development, and I devoted a whole chapter to how to write a photo and video viewer in Unity, and you had to do all this stuff of flipping the materials around, writing different shaders. So we made that out of the box in a set of property sheets for that. So that's in beta now. It's going to ship with 5.6. Beyond that, the other thing we're finding for VR that we didn't have enough of is we didn't have any art tools. I don't know why this keeps happening, by the way.
Oh, it's back again.
We didn't actually have any art tools. You're mostly writing code. I mean, yeah, you can import your keyframes, but there was no way to sequence media and all that stuff. So we've actually created a tool called Timeline where you can sequence multiple video clips, audio clips, and keyframe animations together to create a unified presentation. So we're starting to move into the area of cinematic VR a little bit, and some of those techniques we're definitely going to apply in augmented reality so that you can now bring animators and modelers more into your core workflow than we used to have before. So we're taking this really seriously, and 2017, 2018 are going to be a big journey for us along this route. And then the other really cool thing that Unity has is Unity Labs. It's a whole group based in San Francisco, but there are also offices in Paris and other places where we do advanced research in graphics, advanced research in VR, and now actually a big part of our mandate for 2017 is going to be augmented reality. I wish I knew more details about that, but this is all kind of emerging, and if you folks are interested in that piece of it, what we're going to do in labs, I can connect you to Toni West, who's the project manager there. You're going to see her in a demo in a second. So I'm done with the formal part of my talk. If you guys want to lean back for like 2 minutes, I'm going to show a video of something we showed at our Unite conference, which is in VR, in world creation, with a tool called Editor VR. Did any of you guys see this already? So a few of you folks have seen this. So one of the things that's nuts, I was just at this event the other day where I gave a version of this talk, and Philip Rosedale, the founder of Second Life, who's now doing this other thing called High Fidelity, similar to Second Life, he had a great slide which was talking, it was a picture of an Etch-a-Sketch and a mouse. And the Etch-a-Sketch was demonstrating how shitty it is to try and draw in 2D with a 1D input device, the dial, right? I mean, how many of you have used an Etch-a-Sketch, right? And then he said, and by contrast, here's the mouse. And we've been trying to make 3D with a mouse for 30 years, right? So what if we could actually have 3D inputs to do our creation? I thought that was a brilliant illustration of that. And these folks at Unity Labs have been building worlds in VR. So that's what I'm going to show you a video of. And it can actually be used for 2D game dev or 3D VR development. So sit back and watch this for a minute, and then let's talk.
We've been hard at work since February, haven't we?
A couple of months.
Yeah. At Vision Summit, we announced and showed off our first, one of our first lab projects, a VR authoring tool. Since then, we've been building a strong foundation to
That is a mirror.
all of the developer tools we expect to see coming from you for Editor VR. Now we're going to take a few minutes to show you what you can expect to see in December.
And that's Timony.
Hey, you have a Vive on this time.
I have a Vive on? What? Oh no, yeah, we support both. All right. How are we doing? Are we live?
You're live. Take it away.
Neat. Okay, so as you can see, we are in the beautiful world of Firewatch. Thanks so much to Campo Santos for letting us use these amazing assets. How many of you guys have played Firewatch? You guys know the game? It's so great, right? Yes. I love it. I wish I was announcing Firewatch VR today, but I am not. Okay. If you've played the game, or if you haven't played the game, you might notice this space is looking a little empty right now. So what I'm going to do is add some objects to the scene view. So you see here is the Unity button. I click on that, and I get my main menu, and now I'm going to open up the project view. Okay, so this is your project view. This is new. And this is called a workspace. It's basically the 3D equivalent of a window. So just like in the regular Unity, you can resize it to any size you want. You can put it wherever you want. And you've got your files on the left here. And then you have your game objects on the right. So I'm going to open up the disk screen here. I cleverly sorted my objects already. And I just start adding objects to the scene. And Mary, you want to talk a little bit about performance stuff?
Sure. So if you're taking a look at the project workspace, you can see as she moves her pointer over different objects, we're only rendering one object at a time. If you're a VR developer, you likely already know why. It's for performance reasons. Also, I'll point out that this is just Unity's normal UI system. So as a developer, you're not building anything new. You don't have to learn anything new. This is important for us because we want you to be able to take the UIs you build for Editor VR and be able to transport them to your built players that you release.
That's right. We want to make it really easy for you to just get running with this stuff.
There you go. So that's the basics. Editor VR is a project from Unity Labs. It is not part of our core product. It's actually been released as an open source project as of the middle of December. So if folks have an appetite to say build additional tools for it or just extend it or fix bugs, we'd be totally open to that. And the intent is this is going to be an ongoing project. It's going to have a life of its own outside of the Unity editor for now because it's highly experimental, it's kind of groundbreaking, and there's a lot to be done still. So we wanted to approach it more as an open source project. So, in summary, We're changing the world together, but that gap of disappointment is kind of right here for us right now. So let's make sure we have our expectations set correctly for ourselves, the world, investors, partners, anybody else. But that's okay. We're all going to get through it together. Unity's awesome. No regrets joining this place. It's great. I'm having a really good time there. We built killer product, killer people. We're getting into VR and AR, but AR this year a lot with not just labs, but in product. We've got a good partnership with Microsoft on the HoloLens. Love to talk to all you devs about what you're doing. I'm based in San Francisco. I'm going to come up here about once a month. I'd love to have you come visit here. And thanks for listening. Would love to open it up and do a little discussion, topics, and questions if that works for you, Dwayne.
Absolutely.
Great. So let's do it. Anyone want to jump in? Don't all at once. Oh, thank you. Please. I was just going to be in the hotel bar getting soused right about now anyway, so this is fun to be here. Thank you for that. We'll start with you since you're up front there.
You opened this video by saying the mouse and the difference of this, and you used the exact UI that is in the 2D. So how is this better? Like, what affordance do you give?
Well, did you note that, I mean, that was just for menu access, but did you note that all the object movement and scaling and everything was direct manipulation?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
So the question was, you're basically showing a 2D UI in 3D when you do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some good parts, but I mean, for an experimental thing, I'd want to push it a lot further to really dig into how to make this more intuitive.
I think that's a great question. I'm probably the wrong person to answer that only because I don't know a lot of the design decisions that went into what you see here, because it may have been that they tried other metaphors that were a little more real world and natural, like having things in suitcases or buckets or laid out more in space versus stuck on a menu, and decided that they were either ergonomically not good or maybe they weren't that efficient for performance. I just have no idea. So that'd really be a question for Timothy or Amir or anybody else building the project. So it's a good insight. You know, why so much of the 2D menu stuff? I mean, I personally would, knee-jerk reaction would say, I think there's a lot of convenience to having the 2D menus for this part of it where you're just trying to scroll through and find things versus when you need to manipulate them. But again, I'd be putting words into their mouths. They may have had other reasons for doing that. Next.
I'm going to try and get these people that are asking the questions to speak on the mic so that the people at home can hear them, and Tony doesn't have to repeat your questions.
Thank you, Dwayne.
What are the things outside of video games have people been making in Unity for VR, AR, IR, whatever we're calling it these days?
Well, this is the incredible thing, and again, this is one of the reasons that I'm here now and have a job at Unity. I'm not a gamer. And what happened was, sometime last year, I don't know, it was early last year or later last year, I joined in October, the company realized we have a platform that everybody is trying to do everything with when it comes to VR and AR. Because here's the thing, on a flat screen on your desktop or your mobile, 3D graphics has always been there, I mean for a long time now. Acceleration for those graphics have been there for over a decade, coming on 2 decades in terms of the pipeline that could do this stuff fast. But on a flat screen, it's only been used for 2 things: video games and high-end design, and CAD type stuff, building architecture by specialists who pay a lot of money for expensive software packages on you know, those apps, or consumers who want the you know, jolt and juice of, you know, real 3D action, right? For everything else, 3D has been luxurious. Some of us who've been at this for a long time have had a vision that 3D could be the future of user interface, even rendered on a flat screen. It didn't need a stereoscopic display. Well, then everything changed with VR and, let's call it MR in the HoloLens sense. Because now, your environment's 3D. You actually need to create your application as a 3D application. There is no 2D cheating. You can't just build things in Photoshop and Windows or HTML, flat HTML. You actually need to present a 3D environment. It doesn't matter whether you're doing a building walkthrough or a video game or a data visualization or medical application or historical recreation or education piece or you need a 3D pipeline to do that. You need 3D rendering, you need 3D tools. So what happened was, sometime last year, Unity realized everyone's trying to do everything from automotive to building an architecture, to retail, to get you into the, you know, car showroom to sell you the thing, to blow dryers. I mean, you name it was being done in Unity once VR and AR came along. So part of the reason I'm here is to help us figure out which ones of those we want to optimize for and help people with a lot. We can't do it all. Our products are really designed to be game products. Now, it turns out that there's a huge overlap between that technology and the technologies you need to do all these other things from a point of view of the engine. But the workflows are very different. The way you set up a game level is very different from what you do in other applications. The data sources for gaming they're like Maya, you know, and Blender and SketchUp and these little cheap tools, right? For automotive, it's like, you know, AutoCAD, it's Revit, it's, and for architecture and those things. So it's very different data sets that then have to get converted in different ways. And you just run into all these stupid problems right now where, like, if you just try to import the data for the latest, jet fighter that you've designed in a CAD package and you try and bring it into Unity, you'll bring it to its knees and it'll have 30 or 40 million polygons in it and it won't be set up for real-time development at all, right? So we need to sort through those use cases, figure out which ones we want to sort of generally enable to let the million flowers bloom, everyone be able to shine using Unity, versus what we can do practically out there in the real world. Does that make sense?
Yep, pretty much hit it. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Thanks.
Just a related question on applications. I think I heard you on a podcast talking about the possibilities down the line. You may have been talking about actually news story applications and web VR. I'm curious if any examples out there have caught your attention.
So is this really, you're asking about the story part of it or the web VR part of it?
The story kind of news presentation templates. Like I saw the Guardian thing, I think it's 6x9 or something about solitary confinement. I'm just curious in terms of content creation, like, what do you see?
So there's really two different things. So, if you know my background, I'm really passionate about web tech, and that's what I was working on 20 years ago. Still believe in it. Unity's very excited about it. Unity was actually started as a web browser plugin. That was our first engine years ago, back in 2008, 2009. But there's been twists and turns, and mobile applications came along. A whole bunch of things have changed. So let's just table the web part for a second. We can even come back to that later, but let's start with storytelling. So there's a lot of storytelling going on in VR, right? We see linear video being captured in 360, and folks just wanting to take you in another place so you get a video tour of the Eiffel Tower. You're getting storytelling being done with game tech, with the real-time stuff, like the kind of things that Baobab and a lot of the new emerging animation studios are doing, where you're in a world. It's very game-like. You've got heavy-duty 3D content. You can interact with it, but in general, there's no win condition. Games are all about leveling up, winning. Storytelling VR is about taking you some other place, and potentially letting you explore, right? And this is where we're at in the world, is we don't even know the terms for this stuff. And if you go to enough of these industry panels, you sort of glaze over after a while, where people are talking about the idea that we don't have the vocabulary for what VR storytelling is. But it really is an issue. It's like, what do you do as a film director when the user has agency to look around everywhere? You have to make different directorial choices now. Now take that same idea and give them a free-form world to explore, where you get them in a Vive, they can move around positionally, or in a Rift, they can move around positionally. Or you can do this in AR as well. Like, what if you create a AR, MR, HoloLens thing, where it's you're placing objects in a bunch of different places within this physical space, say. How do you create a compelling story around that? We know nothing about it yet. All we can do is create in terms of established practice. I mean, have we seen a really good hit VR 360 movie yet? I mean, we've seen some fun stuff, some great demos. Felix and Paul make some really good content. There's some studios making some great content, but we haven't really felt the hit yet. There's no one movie we can point to and go, that's the thing, right? Though we all have our personal favorites. So I don't know where we're going with that. Do you want to just follow up a little bit? Because I wonder what you're thinking when you were asked about that. But that's, by the way, Unity's really interested in this, because it is very similar to the game tech we have now to be able to build exploratory worlds. And we've enhanced that with a video playback, because we had this stupid problem. You couldn't play videos well in Unity. So we want to give creators the tools to be able to do both, but we have no idea where it's headed in terms of what those good stories are going to be, or how much people will pay for them, and where the real business is. But is that what you were kind of getting at?
Yeah, I mean, maybe my question is premature as everything is developing, but like, I don't want to get into an election speech, but post-Trump, we all have opinions about news. Maybe the solutions lie in new technology formats and being able to connect with people. That's what I'm getting at.
I see. Well, certainly new technologies will get people excited. They will get them to suspend disbelief. So you've got a little more latitude in how you want to hook them and tell them stories. I think ultimately, once the novelty wears off of that, you're going to get into a set of the same old problems there. With the exception that I think a lot of folks are picking up on this idea that because you're fully present, VR creates this better sense of empathy. So the storytelling that I was referring to, both within and Felix and Paul are great at this. Who's seen that, the Felix and Paul piece with Bill Clinton? Speaking of politics right now. Oh, this is so great. Inside Impact, East Africa, Felix and Paul did this thing where camera's on and you're in the whatever 60th story office of Bill Clinton in Manhattan, sitting across the desk from him. He's talking to you from like across the desk, telling you about the Clinton Foundation, their not-for-profit work in Africa. You feel like you're right there with the guy too, right? And then you go to 3 different places in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania, and I forgot the third one. I feel bad for forgetting that. I don't know, by 10 minutes into it, I was bawling like a baby. I mean, I really felt like I was there. I felt this intimate relationship, like Clinton was speaking to me one-on-one. It was crazy, in a way you don't get if you're just watching a flat video. And I don't think that was the novelty of the tech. You really do, because everything's shut off around you. The setting feels more natural, even though it's 360. It's mapped on a sphere. If you lean in, Clinton doesn't get any closer, right? You can't go up and touch him on the nose or anything. But it's still, you've really got that intimate feeling. And Felix and Paul did that one. Some of the things that Chris Milk and his team do really make you feel like you're there. So in that sense, yeah, I think that's going to erode some emotional barriers and maybe get people to be a little less of a combative and hostile point of view. So sure. Being able to export culture the way television did as a broadcast medium, we can go further with that with game tech and VR tech, I think, to get people to understand each other better, because a lot of the political environment was about the other and being against people and setting up villains and things like that maybe wouldn't happen. So there is an opportunity, but I don't think I would personally oversell the potential of that. I think there is some there, but I don't know, maybe I'm just old and cynical. I feel like at the end of the day, we'll get back to the same hassles when we're done. Once we've gotten past that, people will find new ways to be not so great. Dwayne, you're in charge of the mic and picking the...
We've got questions coming in from online, too.
Oh, would you like to read some?
Let's do that.
All right.
@Real Donald Trump asks...
Here we go. Gap aside, did Tony see anything out of CES that blew his hair back?
I'm happy to say I didn't go to CES. I avoid that show because it's really hardcore, because you end up just meeting a lot of people in a closed space during flu season, not sleeping and partying too hard, and I always come back sick as a dog, so I actually didn't go to CES. So I can't speak to that personally. Sorry, yeah, got to duck that one. I heard some cool reports out of CES, but I can't answer that one.
Yeah, could you speak about WebGL for mobile browsers?
What would you like to know? WebGL exists on every mobile browser. It's implemented on 3 billion devices on the planet.
Yeah, it works great for things like Play Canvas and Sketchfab and 3js.org. But not on Unity, as far as I know. Could you speak about that?
Okay, so who here doesn't know what WebGL is? Let's start that way. Okay, so WebGL is OpenGL, which is 3D rendering that can talk to the hardware acceleration on your phone or your computer. So you get the fastest and best graphics. It's that system that you can program using JavaScript in your web browser. So instead of building an app in an engine like Unity or a native code like C++, you can actually just use HTML, JavaScript, and create your application that way. Why would you do that, you may ask? Well, here's a reason you might want to do that. Maybe you don't want to download an application. That's number one. You don't want your consumers to have to download something. You just share a link with them, a URL with them, and they can get it. Second reason you might want to do that is that arguably JavaScript's a really easy language to program in, though if you do it in production, you'll know it's got a lot of warts and there's a lot of problems with it. But it does run everywhere once you've done that. So you can reduce friction for your own development, but more importantly, it's reducing consumer friction greatly. So basically, I can share a tweet, and it's got a hyperlink in it. You hit it, and you just see 3D graphics, right? Well, that's fabulous. And you mentioned some frameworks that actually work to create to create WebGL, like 3.js, a JavaScript library, open source. Thousands of pull requests on GitHub. Mr. Doob, the creator of it, has 34,000 Twitter followers. It's super popular, as well as these other systems that are sort of more like tool level. So what's Unity doing there? Well, Unity's actually had WebGL export since 2014, maybe? I don't know. I actually got a text message from David Helgeson when they announced it finally, and he said, took us long enough, which was really funny. He and I have been bantering about this stuff for years. It was long before I joined Unity. But here's how it works. They took the entire Unity engine code, which is written in C++ largely, and cross-compiled it to JavaScript using a tool set called mscripten, for whatever it's worth. The resulting morass of code is 10 megabytes of JavaScript delivered into your web browser, but it's the entire Unity engine, including the C# virtual machine interpreter interpreting all your scripts for every update frame. The amazing, God, I don't know how it works, but it actually renders games at 60 frames a second, and it's freaking phenomenal. But that's not great for most web use cases. It's great for game, like, okay, so now I want to build an MMO, and if your player doesn't mind waiting 3 or 4 minutes for a loader bar while the engine's loading, and then a little more for the assets for the first level to load, that's fine. That works great for a game, but the thing is we already have ways to deliver games, like especially on mobile. We have app stores for that. Any motivated person who wants to buy a game, get a game is going to buy it in the Steam store on the desktop. So there's a big mismatch between the business model of a game developer and how we deliver that. However, that is not the case for a lot of other applications you'd want to do on the web. Let's say you want to build a 3D visualization of some real estate and you want to use that to market your real estate site. People are doing this now in WebGL, by the way, but they're not using Unity to do that because your end user isn't going to wait 4 minutes to just get the loader screen before they even see the content, right? So we know this at Unity, and we're working on it. We're thinking about how to fix that situation. So for most other web use cases, not a great solution right now, but we're on it. But this question is leading to something else, which is there's a thing now called WebVR. And in fact, I left the WebVR happy hour that was happening in Kirkland today. So there were actually members of Oculus, Google, Mozilla, Samsung, and Microsoft all working together to get their browsers to support virtual reality and augmented reality. So you take the current WebGL-enabled browser and you add the ability to head track, and full screen render in stereo for VR, or AR render with the pipeline just by flipping a few switches. Again, your code's written in JavaScript. And you extend the browser's already had a gamepad API, so you could plug in an Xbox or PS4 controller, and you extend that with a couple of properties so you can get the pose, and now you can do Vive controllers, because it's just button codes and positions, right? This has been working in Chrome on a desktop for 2 years already, and Firefox on a desktop for 2 years already. The big changes last summer, around August, Oculus said they were going to do it. They actually pulled me into a room and said, we're going to do this, and after I pulled my jaw up off the floor, this is Oculus with their app store, right? They said, we're doing web, but we really believe in it, because they're Facebook now. They want to reach billions of people. After I pulled my jaw up off the floor, I said, what can I do to help? I actually, before I joined Unity, worked on some projects with them. And then 2 weeks later, Microsoft blogged about how they're doing it for Edge and Windows Holographic. So it's coming. So you're going to actually be able to write JavaScript code with no download and be able to get different kinds of VR experiences. I wouldn't do AAA game VR titles with this. I wouldn't even do cinematic VR the type we're talking about for 2 reasons. 1, it's heavy-duty content. 3 reasons. 2, you need the highest performance. You're going to squeeze everything out, and browsers aren't quite as fast as native code, though that gap is shrinking over time. And 3, the business models, again, they don't line up. If I'm making a AAA game or if I'm making a piece of cinematic VR, I probably want to sell it on Steam and make some money off it. But if I'm doing a travel site or a video sharing site or a real estate walkthrough or God knows a million other applications, the kind of things we do on the web today, I might want this. So imagine this scenario where I'm in the Facebook feed and someone posts a link and goes like, check this out. You hit the link, you put your Rift on, you're done. You're in VR. that's going to be freaking great. It's already working today, experimentally. I think we had one over there. Where are you doing with the mic? We'll get you all. We got it. Well, until they kick us out.
So you mentioned pretty early on about we don't know what's going on with VR, AR in terms of will there be app stores and so on. And you also mentioned that today you still have that kind of idea where you click on an app, you go into one VR experience, you come out of that, you go into the next one. Carmack talked about GLTF and a bunch of technologies to try and enable a more seamless experience there, so you have to keep coming out to your phone or to your Oculus store or whatever. I just wonder what your thoughts are around how that kind of metaverse idea will come about, what technologies Unity are investing in to make that happen, and just your general thoughts of how it's going to go the next couple of years.
So I'll talk broadly and then I'll get a little specific about Unity, but a lot of this is forward thinking for us and not even plans I can talk about or commit. We're barely ready to commit to them, but we're thinking, again, we're thinking and talking about a lot of it. Just think about the general case here. So imagine if you had the scenario I'm talking about where at the click of a link, or with just a simple share or a tweet or a Facebook feed or something you see in email, you can get to some VR content. Well, it's probably not likely that you're going to go from your flat screen to popping it into your Gear VR, or it's not going to be that kind of modality. What's great about that is that's a great way for initial discovery, right? Imagine that for now as a sort of transient state on the way toward where we're going to go, which people making browsers for VR are investing in this now. There will be a Chrome VR browser from Google this quarter, apparently. That's what they've been telling me. They said it in public in a panel with me a month ago. There is already the Carmel browser from Oculus for the Gear VR. It has a built-in user interface to let you look around and stuff. But the looking around right now is sort of similar to the Gear VR Home, Oculus Home, tiles in space. This gets back to what you were saying. Can't we do a little better than that? We're just throwing rectangles up in space. It's where we start. But over time, now I'm really dating myself. I mean, the original web browsers didn't have most of the navigation and bar stuff we see today. They had an address bar and maybe forward and back. And you see where we've come with tabs and a lot of built-in UI. There will be certain utility built-in user interface into all these browsers that will include some ability to use the controls to do some things, some ability to discover content, and some of it may be super functional, silly tiles and space UI. Some of it might be super prosaically attempting to be like the real world, where you're walking through environments to discover things and objects are the hyperlinks and you tap on them. That's going to get tiring really quick. I mean, imagine walking through cyberspace, metaverse, to discover everything. That won't work either. So it might be some blend of that. So some utility UIs where your controls can be popping up menus, plus realistic environments. We don't know yet, but the people making the VR browsers are already investing in the utility UI that we're going to need to get started, right? And once the usage patterns emerge that we know about, you'll see probably more of those get. The baseline of those get built into a browser so that any consumer has some comfortable set of common operations they always do. Does that make sense? Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, and also kind of what Unity are doing in that area.
Yeah, and then so the second half of this is what's Unity doing. I mean, baseline, we're going to empower WebVR at some level. Beyond that, I think you'll see the evolution of user interface creation tools that we would provide kind of mirror what we did in game dev, where we finally put in some UI controls into this thing in mid version 4, I think it was. You used to have to go get stuff off the asset store to build 2D UIs, and it was always an afterthought, even though a lot of your game would have exit signs in it or actual things in 2D you needed to do and interact with and little menus. People would always build their own, and then Unity added some stuff that wasn't in the asset store and they built it in. We'll see, we'll probably do something like that, but it's way too early for us to know what that's going to look like.
GLTF,
and maybe some of it will be informed by what Timony and the labs group are doing too.
Gotcha. I just wanted to ask about GLTF. Is that anything? Are you doing anything in terms of import-export there? That's kind of the fun part.
Okay, so the question is about GLTF. I'm not repeating the question. I'm just going to explain what this thing is. That's the GL transmission format. Think of it as JPEG for 3D. In my copious spare time over the last 3 years, I actually worked on a format that's basically a 3D data format. So you can export out of Maya or one of these 3D tools and bring it into, it was originally intended for WebGL applications and then secondarily for mobile, But everyone in VR is kind of glommed onto it as a format now, and as well as AR, the Windows team's working on with it as well. So it gets your data out of a 3D content creation tool, and it gets it all. Like if any of you have been working with graphics pipelines and you're trying to get data out of 3D Max and into some specific thing, especially for WebGL, if you've tried this before, the state of the art for a couple of years was you export individual OBJ files for each object, but you're losing where they're placed in the scene, and you didn't have the lighting, and you didn't have the textures, and you didn't have all that other information. So for a couple of years there, what you'd have happen is technical artists were working with the actual, the artists, and like it was like cans and string. They were like, okay, they actually read the positions to them or emailed them to them, and they'd have to retype them into the runtime. It was horrible, right? So we realized this problem was happening, and we worked on a format that would capture all the scene data, make it load efficiently over the web as well as mobile, and that's GLTF. And that got so much of a groundswell that early last year, the folks from Oculus said, hey, guess what we're doing? We're building a lot of stuff for Gear VR, and we've invented our own graphics pipeline. We're sick of doing that to get all the data out. Why don't we just work on GLTF? Wasn't even like, oh, so that it could be a universal standard for scene data. It was simply like, we need this in our pipeline. Why are we duplicating effort? Why don't we have one engineer work with your team of, this globally distributed team working on this format to pitch in on that versus us having to have 4 people internally work on this tool to get the data out, right? So it's kind of a sharing resource, group collaborative effort just to enable these graphics pipelines. But once you've got that, now you've got something like JPEG where if enough applications can export it or import it, you can do 3D sharing sites, sort of like Sketchfab, which has always used their own file format. They're now starting to use GLTF. So think of the Flickr or Instagram of VR. GLTF enables that kind of thing now. Let's do like 2 more so that we can then mull and socialize.
So you've talked a whole lot. Like I would say I've heard 99% of the conversation dealing with vision and visual display for AR, VR. The partners that I've worked with over the last year, it seems like the vision is just handled super well. Display, like you guys are killing text to speech, speech to text, all these contextual services and build those in. And from my experience, like Unity kind of falls off the rails today as soon as you get into native plugin space, as soon as you get into needing to interact with outside services and cloud services and things like that. So can you talk about anything that you can coming down the pipe to help kind of bridge the gap, talking about getting outside of games and into other content and services?
That's a great insight. We're starting to have some internal realizations about this as a more broad topic. I would say audio is a little bit different because audio is prevalent enough in games that we hear about this enough already from our current base of customers about what we need to do on audio, and there are a lot of discussions going on the audio side internally with partners, et cetera, et cetera. The other piece that you didn't mention was also an area that I didn't talk about so much here. We touched on it, was input. We're actually going to spend a lot of time on making sure that it's easier to do input. Right now it's all kind of add-in based in Unity. That you'll see get better on the roadmap as soon as we can make that better. But then when you start to get to see some of these other things you're talking about, like data integration, yeah, I mean, I've been a Unity user for a long time and a fan for a long time. This is not one of its long suits, right? Maybe we can go offline a little bit and get into more details about this, because once you get into VR, and again, now we're talking about more of a general application platform, and no longer just talking about for game dev or even the cinematic stuff I've been alluding to. When you get all into many of these other applications, you need to start bringing together disparate data sources, performing different kinds of logic operations than you need to do in a game. Games are physics and interaction heavy. They don't need to necessarily do like heavy computation in other realms if you're doing data viz, for example. Yeah, that's all new areas for us, and meaningful and important, but definitely not Unity's strong attributes yet. So yeah, I would love to have a private conversation with you about that.
There's lots of
He got one, so let's get you going over there.
Oops, sorry.
So I feel like this is a follow-on question to the last two.
You know, at the beginning you said one of your core principles is solve the hard problems, and you didn't really define what a hard problem is. So a hard problem could be some, like you gave an example from like the core graphics engine, graphics horsepower, frame rate problem, but in the VR and MR space, we're seeing a lot of innovation happening by independent developers. So an example in VR would be comfortable artificial locomotion. And an example in MR would be normalized surface reconstruction meshes. And then I feel like GLTF and the question about audio input are other great examples of this. And I'm wondering what Unity's philosophy of solving these problems will be. Is it you're going to try to solve them entirely internally, or do you have a process where you're going to adopt best practices from the community?
Can I just say yes to all of it? That would be the way to cheat. I mean, there's a lot of smart people in this company. And they're not just smart technically, they're smart business-wise. So the challenge for something like this is always, first of all, we don't want to solve everything for everybody. We can't. So we try to approach this as from a platform philosophy instead. So get people the basic tools. And so the hard problems we've been focused on for a while now they're around brute force and performance and cross-platform and all the stuff that any one dev team would just get buried under if they're small, you know, and you just get that stuff out of the box, right, for a lot of this. And that's been the focus of it. Beyond that, we're trying to lean into it from the lab side where we really can start working on other problems beyond rendering and performance, whether those are interaction, you know, as you saw there, and editor VR, I mean, from a design standpoint, those are some hard problems, and they're also going to drive some other kinds of performance profile things, right? When you start getting into domain specificity, though, that's where we'd rather have our customers be doing that, right? We'd rather have them telling us, well, I could solve this problem, except Unity doesn't do this one thing, and then we can maybe go fix that one thing. But you know, beyond that, if it's not providing like huge broad, I mean, we're like an 80-20 Pareto distribution kind of thing, right? We're trying to democratize game development, which means we got to serve lots of people, right? And there may be some constituencies we can't super serve for some of the hardest problems out there, right? For those, we're hoping that we can enable them. So is that helpful? I mean, it's more of a philosophy than anything. And then, you know, there's some things we can't share about what we're doing in labs yet as well that could be, you know, inching toward what you're talking about as well. But some of these are actually not public projects yet. Sorry, that was really vague and wishy-washy. I apologize.
I'm certainly not going to drag you off. So if you still got,
there's a few more questions. I'll hang. Like I said.
Quick question from online. No one knows nothing asks. What is the expected number of AR VR devices by Unity's estimate by the end of 2018? Not that you speak for the company, but.
Well, no. If I'm up here, I'm speaking for the company. We're generally going with conservative estimates that you're seeing in some of the market research reports. Gartner, Goldman Sachs have produced reports. 2018 numbers are sort of, you see like 25 million were the projections. I mean, I personally think we could beat that because we've already seen 5 million Gear VRs now, a few million of the other devices in aggregate across desktop and mobile. And I'm not counting cardboard because cardboard's more than 10 million of them from the anecdotal stuff I've heard. I'm not counting that, not because it doesn't have merit, but I think most of us are shooting. I mean, you can argue about that. I'm not going to diss cardboard as that first taste, right? But I think everyone's trying to set, but they're trying to set a realistic floor on this, which is that if it's a mobile device, it's got the performance of something more like a Gear or a Daydream, that it's not just slapping a normal phone. The phone was designed for VR, right? I think so. If you look in light of the 5+ million, again, I guess you add it up, it's closer to 6 now if you count Gears 5. The idea that we wouldn't get to at least 25 million by the end of 2018, it feels to me, and this is my opinion only, disclaimer, yada yada yada. We're going to be doing something wrong if that's not true. And again, that's not even adding in the AR devices yet, which we're going to just start seeing some uptake to. Nothing like these numbers yet because of the cost again, but I'd say by the end of 2018, you throw them in too, and I think that number is going to get interesting. And again, I'd hope it'd be bigger than 25 mil.
Okay.
Let's do a few more.
Thanks.
As a possible bridge for the more general VR platform, is there any plans to support cross-platform objects? So if I shoot my gun in Call of Duty and assume that I have my friend is playing on, say, battle tank that is not happen to be written in Unity, will that bullet enter my virtual world, have the velocity and the trajectory that it did from the game that I was playing?
Well, this is not a cop-out. I mean, the reality is that's solely dependent on the developer of that experience, right?
Right. As a platform, you guys are in a position to make that a lot easier for me as a developer so that I can talk to all of these other things, especially if you bridge the gap with, say, Unreal.
Yeah, no, as a well, yeah, we don't have a lot of motivation to bridge the gap with Unreal for that particular experience. But again, if the developer wants to do that, they can glue the two runtimes together with network code and some other stuff, right? Some magic.
Well, I would
but certainly in Unity-based stuff, it mostly works that way today. We make things easy enough where you could do everything from a phone to deep desktop VR if you design it right. And again, it's not a one button. As I was saying earlier, you don't have to you're not going to just press a button and get an instant port, but most of your graphics code will port over, right? But carry on, please.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is if you look at what web VR is trying to be, that's essentially the problem I have with web VR is the browser. The browser is not built for 3D worlds, etc. The technology is not built for it. It has great interoperability, cross-platform, etc. But if instead all of the engine makers started working on a standard built specifically for 3D, this would make our lives a lot easier and new experiences possible.
So that's a big old can of worms. Yeah, I hear you. Or let's look at it this way and not sweat the technical details too much. Let's just spin a little vision around this. Let's say in 3 years' time, the distinction between a game engine and a browser maybe goes away because browsers become fundamentally different and designed for VR. So, I mean, I don't know what that means for legacy web and et cetera, but just imagine all the code behind that and those really smart people who make browsers now do a hot 3D core connected with networking and ways to script it, and that's basically your metaverse browser. Or a game engine gets networking and smart enough to do that. These two technologies are going to converge over time, right? And I think some of us think there could be a universal runtime that powers that would be basically that, where content is standardized so that it doesn't care which of these environments it runs on. I believe that will happen. I believe market forces will demand that over time, despite the competition that's inherent in people wanting to build their fiefdoms. I think we'll get to that for the same reasons we got to a web where people just want to share that information. They want unfettered access. Developers want to be able to reach everybody. I think we'll get there. But I was going somewhere else with this and I forgot. Where are we going with it, though? So can you imagine that future?
Absolutely.
Right, and that's the future you're talking about? So it's not browsers versus not browsers. You want to know, can we get to a place where we're going to get interoperable with real-time 3D content?
And beyond just the 3D part, all the properties that go along with it.
Right. And you were also talking about cross-device, where maybe I can do it on a flat screen or a console or an HMD, right?
Cross-device and cross-engine.
Yeah.
It's going to require something other than a faster horse, though.
It's going to require something other than a faster horse. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, so. But here's the other thing. One of the interesting motivations behind the folks at Oculus doing WebVR is they want to make this accessible everywhere. So what have we probably all experienced this doing VR and AR? You're creating this really deep, incredible experience, and people get really excited about it. And maybe you're trying to do something to consumer or B2B2C, where you're trying to do an advertising platform or something. Everybody gets super excited about the engagement and the excitement, and then the realization hits that you're only going to reach a few million people. So then folks start asking, and to me I find it just so absurd, so sort of quaint and touching that they say, can we get that to run on a flat screen too? Right? So I'm a big believer in monoscopic, non-immersive virtual reality and augmented reality. In other words, can you get the same content to run on the few billion devices out there? And with some amount of craft you can. And so that's not the same as the universal browser and 3D runtime scenario you're talking about. That's more like responsive web design or creating something that can reach everybody. And a lot of the folks doing VR now, whether it's a native desktop or web or whatever it is, are starting to think about that. How can we hybrid? How can we bridge the gap so that you create these awe-inspiring experiences for those who have the devices, but you also have something that can be accessed through normal means for the VR have-nots, the AR have-nots who just have a lowly MacBook Pro or whatever. So I feel like those two concepts are kind of related. Does that make sense? So I was just kind of riffing on what you said.
It's even more important in AR, where you have to blend.
Even more important in AR. All right, any more? Keep going.
So I'm curious, in the HoloLens world, you know, we have the AirTap and we have the head pointer. Do you have any predictions about how controls or something is going to evolve in that space?
I don't have any predictions. I have biases and I have things that drive me nuts. Gaze-based stuff drives me nuts. I mean, just from a pure human factor standpoint, as a consumer of it, everything that cardboard was the biggest offender just because you had the limited input, right? So if you didn't look at it and watch the reticle timeout, you're screwed, right? So I feel like it's already sort of poisoned a lot of UI design, but at the same time, there's a beauty to it, which is it gives you these constraints you have to work in. Unfortunately, those constraints force neck strain and artificial movements, right? So I'm wary of things that consciously make you control gaze or head motion, or you know, when it's getting to eye tracking. You know, if you've ever tried the FOV or any of the eye tracking devices, this is about how you design your app. This has got nothing to do with the technology being good or bad, right? I believe in that eye tracking stuff as being a great way to assist rendering optimization and subtle ways of making a user interface responsive based on figuring out where you're looking. Those are potentially nefarious things, by the way, as well, but subtly improving your life that way. But if you have to make conscious decisions about where you're looking, because you know you're like Cyclops from the X-Men, and you don't want to destroy a building by looking at it, or Superman, you know, and with your heat vision, then that UI is probably not a good one. So those are really dicey, and I've seen a lot of stuff that I feel like doesn't work. And the HoloLens, I feel like there's some of that when I've played with it. In terms of how you design for looking, but I mean, HoloLens, you're super constrained because you know you don't look that way, you don't see anything anymore, right? You got these 40 degrees in front of you. In terms of the finger tap and all that, those are pretty promising. What I've seen on the HoloLens, it's not perfect, and I'm getting annoyed with, you know, I'm getting fatigued and annoyed with some of it. But as a starting point, that was pretty good out of the box. I thought I was pleasantly surprised by how far you get with that, and how little user frustration you get from repeated use on that stuff. I don't know how you guys feel about that. I think all that stuff is baby steps. So far, the best things I've seen are definitely the Vive hand stuff, and the Oculus Touch stuff is really working effectively in well-designed UIs right now. The quicker we can get to 6DoF in VR systems, even the mobile ones, and the quicker we can exploit those principles so that you have you can do hand tracking in the AR systems, but not have to be so constrained. Or you know, 6DoF for the mobile. I think the better off we're going to be. I think these, because of the sense of presence, because of all the other senses that are being tricked, proprioception and you know, stereoscopic vision and all that, you create an expectation that you can't fulfill with your hands yet. You naturally want to use your hands, right? So whether that's through controllers or leap motion, hand motion, or HoloLens style hands, you know, gestures. I don't know what the ultimate incarnation is going to be, but I feel like we have to get there. Either that, or we might as well just sit on the couch and use an Xbox controller for a lot of this stuff, which I personally think is totally convenient. And I'm a fat ass who wants to sit on my couch. I don't want to run around and big room scale things, right? So that may end up being a pretty popular input device. I don't know. 2 more, and then I think I might fall over soon. I do work at a standing desk all day. I'm getting used to standing up more and more. I love that. I highly recommend it. It's a new thing for me.
That's a super quick follow-on from that about input. So I personally believe that voice interaction will probably become a big thing, and we're already seeing traction hugely with Alexa and Cortana and Siri and Betsy or whoever's coming next. So what is...
Show me the weather in Stevens Pass. Boom, a weather map comes up.
Or just
right?
take me to Stevens Pass.
Or take me to Stevens Pass so I can get a view. Why am I like why am I clicking on a menu or anything?
Exactly, why am I gazing at the thing? So I just wondered, from your perspective, did you also agree with that? And then the follow-on is always, what are Unity doing to make that super easy for people to plug into?
Clearly, I agree with it. It's a big bugaboo for me, and I think a lot of it was driven by the restrictive nature of input for these first couple of years of VR. Where I was like, geez, I just want to talk to this freaking thing. I don't even want menus. Even if I could have menus, again, it breaks a lot of the illusion. Alexa, Siri, these technologies are demonstrating that we've got enough compute power to do some of this effectively. I don't know how far we can take it for VR and AR and how quickly, but that to me I'm super excited about. Can't speak to exactly what Unity's doing there yet, but again, we have this sort of open platform where people can experiment with it too until we're ready to make big pronouncements there. But also at the same time, that was just my opinion. Don't take that as a reflection of anything on product plans or anything yet. I mean that. It's like, I've been thinking about this for 2.5 years already, and like want this to be the reality right now where I can just talk to my freaking computer to do everything. I mean, I don't even want to type anymore, really, so. Last one, anybody else? Any takers? Good, thank you very much. This is so much fun. I'll hang out until they kick us out. As long as you're hanging out, Sarah, we're drinking wherever we're going, so you know, tell me when you want to go. Thanks very much, Dwayne. I'm glad I could be here for this.
Big thanks to Toni.
Yeah. My pleasure.
We have a couple of things to wrap up.
Someone work here? There is a representation.
So before everybody heads out or runs over and starts swarming Toni with more questions, I want to mention a few quick things. There's a member discount page on our website. If you're not aware of it, you should check it out. Many of the publishers and sponsors put special discounts available to our members only. If you log in and you are a WinHUGR member, you can get at this and get some great discounts. Also on that page, not sure what just happened there.
So we're getting a mix here, it's like some devs, some creatives.
All the way back, 1 sec, sorry. Also on that page, one of our sponsors who didn't have any door prizes readily available to us did a really cool thing during the holiday, and this is still ongoing. O'Reilly has made available a choice of one of these 8 to any of our members that you can download. These are normal commercial products ranging from, I think, $17 up to $129. Some of them are video training. You can go in and select one of them off of that page. You will have to log in, use your, you have to create an O'Reilly account if you don't have one, but you can log in and get a free e-book or a free e-video. So check that out if you haven't already. Big thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll probably stop the live stream now as we give out a few door prizes to folks. Toni, if you're still in reach, I'm going to ask you to pull